It started with a worn-out basketball and a desperate plea. When 12-year-old Sarah Thompson fought through the crowd to beg Michael Jordan for help, she had no idea that the basketball she clutched, her only treasure from her late father, it would change everything. All she knew was that her mother was getting sicker. The winter nights in their car were getting colder, and she was running out of options. But when Jordan's eyes landed on that old basketball, something changed. There was a flash of recognition, a moment of disbelief, and then a question that would unravel a story decades in the making. Where did you get that ball? The answer would reveal a promise made long ago between two best friends, a debt left, unpaid, and a legacy that was just waiting to be discovered. This is a story about more than just basketball. It's about family, friendship, and the promises we keep, even if it takes years to fulfill them. Sarah Thompson pulled her thin blanket tighter around her shoulders as the early morning chill crept through the car windows. The old blue Honda had been their home for 3 months now, parked behind Wilson's warehouse where the security guards pretended not to notice them. Mom called it their temporary situation, but Sarah was starting to forget what having a real home felt like. "Rise and shine, sweetie," Mom whispered. Already dressed in her waitress uniform, she worked the breakfast shift at Jerry's Diner 6 blocks away. "Remember to lock up before you head to school." Sarah nodded, watching her mother's reflection in the cracked side mirror as she walked away. Even after working double shifts, Mom somehow managed to keep her head high, her uniform pressed and her smile bright. But Sarah had seen her crying late at night when she thought no one was watching. The trunk of the car was their closet. Sarah dug through the neatly folded clothes. Mom always made sure they looked presentable and pulled out her least wrinkled shirt. The basketball tucked safely in the corner caught her eye, its worn surface covered in faded signatures. Dad's signature was the clearest, probably because she traced it with her finger every night before going to sleep. "Love you forever, champ." She read the words beneath his name for the 1,000th time. Sometimes, if she closed her eyes tight enough, she could still hear him saying it. Getting ready for school in a car wasn't easy, but Sarah had worked out a system. She used the tiny mirror from Mom's old makeup compact to brush her teeth with bottled water, carefully saving half for later. Her dark curly hair was another challenge, but she'd mastered the art of the neat ponytail without a proper mirror. The final touch was her lucky basketball keychain, clipped to her backpack. Dad had given it to her on her 10th birthday, 2 months before the fire that took him away. The walk to Marshall Middle School took exactly 23 minutes if she didn't stop to watch the pickup basketball games at the community court. Today, she allowed herself just 2 minutes to stand at the fence, memorizing the players' moves. One day, she'd be brave enough to ask if she could play too. "Hey, Thompson!" Madison Chen called out as Sarah reached the school gates. "Want to come over after school? Mom's making her famous cookies." Sarah's stomach growled at the thought, but she shook her head. "Can't today. Got stuff to do." The same excuse she'd used for months now. Madison couldn't know that stuff meant finding a safe place to do homework before dark, or that Sarah's stomach had been growling since yesterday's free lunch at school. The morning classes passed in a blur of rumbling stomachs and nodding heads. Sarah fought to stay awake during math, her best subject. Dad had always said she had a head for numbers, just like him. She scribbled basketball plays in the margins of her notebook, imagining herself executing perfect three-pointers like the ones Dad used to make. During lunch, Sarah sat at her usual table by the window, slowly, eating her free school meal while doing homework. The cafeteria was warm, and she wanted to enjoy every minute of it before heading back into the cold. she overheard snippets of conversation from nearby tables, talks of birthday parties, new video games, and weekend plans. Sometimes she imagined joining in, telling them about her own life, but what would she say? That she brushed her teeth in gas station bathrooms? That she did homework by streetlight? The afternoon brought PE class, the one time Sarah felt almost normal. Today they were playing basketball, and she could pretend she was just another kid who happened to be good at the game. Coach Martinez always picked her first for teams, not knowing that basketball wasn't just a sport for her. It was the only piece of her old life she had left. "Great form, Thompson," Coach called out as she sank another basket. "You've got natural talent." If only he knew about the hours she spent practicing at the community court after dark, when no one else was around. How she played until her hands were numb from the cold, imagining Dad's voice. "Follow through on your shot, champ. Eyes on the target." After school, Sarah walked to the public library. It was her favorite place, warm, quiet, and free. She had a special spot near the sports section where she could do homework and read about basketball legends. Today, Shihai pulled out a book about Michael Jordan, studying his techniques until the librarian gave her the 5-minute warning. The sun was setting as she made her way back to the car. She stopped at Jerry's Diner, waving at Mom through the window. 2 more hours until Mom's shift ended. Sarah settled into their car, using the last bit of daylight to finish her math homework. The basketball sat beside her, a silent companion, in the growing darkness. A police car drove by slowly, and Sarah slouched down in her seat. They hadn't bothered her and Mom yet, but she'd seen other homeless people being told to move along. She held her breath until the patrol car turned the corner, then pulled out Dad's basketball, hugging it close. "I miss you, Dad," she whispered, running her fingers over his signature. "I'm trying to be brave, just like you taught me. Mom says things will get better soon, and I believe her. But sometimes..." She wiped away a tear before it could fall. "Sometimes it's really hard." The street lights flickered on, casting long shadows through the car windows. Sarah could see the community court from here, empty now except for her dreams. Tomorrow she'd practice again, working on her jump shot until she got it perfect. Dad always said that practice was the key to making dreams come true. In the distance, she heard Mom's familiar footsteps approaching. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and put on a smile. She had to be strong for Mom, just like Mom was strong for her. Besides, they still had each other, and Dad's basketball, and their dreams. Maybe tomorrow would be the day things finally changed. As Mom slid into the driver's seat, Sarah caught the scent of coffee and French fries. "I brought you a sandwich, sweetie," Mom said, pulling a wrapped package from her purse. "The cook made extra today." Sarah knew there hadn't been any extra sandwiches. She knew Mom had probably spent her tip money to buy it. But she just said, "Thanks, Mom," and tried not to eat too quickly, even though her stomach felt like it was trying to climb out of her throat. They sat together in the quiet car, sharing half a sandwich and tomorrow's dreams, while the basketball with Dad's signature kept watch from the back seat, holding all their memories of better days. Sarah woke up before her alarm the next morning, excitement bubbling in her chest. It was Saturday, which meant no school and, more importantly, morning practice at the community court. She carefully moved Mom's arm from around her shoulders. They always slept close for warmth, and peeked out the window. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, promising a warmer day than usual. Mom stirred beside her. "Early bird today?" she mumbled, her eyes still closed. "Be careful out there, sweetie, and don't forget your water bottle." "I won't, Mom," Sarah promised, already reaching for Dad's basketball in the back seat. she changed quickly into her practice. Clothes, shorts, under sweatpants, and 3 layers of shirts. She could peel them off as the day got warmer. The community court was empty this early, just how she liked it. Her footsteps echoed across the concrete as she walked to the free throw line. The familiar weight of the basketball in her hands felt like coming home. She bounced it once, twice, letting the rhythm calm her racing thoughts. "Eyes on the target, champ," she whispered Dad's words to herself. The ball arced through the air and swished through the net without touching the rim. Perfect shot. For the next hour, Sarah ran drill after drill, the ones Dad had taught her before everything changed. Layups, jump shots, crossover dribbles. Her shoes squeaked against the concrete as she moved across the court. These moments, she wasn't homeless Sarah Thompson who slept in a car. She was just a girl who loved basketball. The sound of voices made her pause mid-dribble. A group of kids from school was approaching the court, led by Marcus Williams, who always had the latest basketball shoes and never missed a chance to point out Sarah's worn-out ones. "Well, look who it is," Marcus called out. "Thompson and her ancient ball. Don't you have anything better to do on a Saturday?" Sarah hugged the basketball closer. "Court's big enough for everyone," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. She'd learned that showing fear only made things worse. "Whatever," Marcus snorted. "Just stay out of our way. We've got actual practice to do. The school team tryouts are next month." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't known about the tryouts. Playing for the school team had been her dream since, well, forever. But how could she join? She didn't have proper shoes, a uniform, or any of the equipment she'd need. Still, she couldn't help watching as Marcus and his friends started their practice game. They were good. Marcus especially had a decent 3-point shot, but Sarah noticed things they were doing wrong. Dad had taught her to see the small details. Feet not properly positioned, wasted movement in their follow-through, rushing shots they should take time with. "Your elbow's too wide," she found herself saying as Marcus missed another 3-pointer. The words had slipped out before she could stop them. Marcus spun around, his face red. "What did you say?" Sarah swallowed hard but stood her ground. Dad always said that knowledge was nothing to be ashamed of. "Your shooting elbow. It's sticking out too far. That's why you're missing left." "Oh yeah? Think you know better than me?" "Prove it." The other kids formed a circle around them, and Sarah felt her palms start to sweat. But when Marcus tossed her the ball, muscle memory took over. She positioned herself at the 3-point line, elbow in, eyes on the target. The ball left her hands in a perfect arc. Swish. The court fell silent. "Lucky shot," Marcus muttered, but Sarah could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Do it again." She did. 3 more times. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" one of the other kids asked. "My dad taught me," Sarah said softly, running her fingers over his signature on her ball. "He said basketball is like life. It's not about being perfect, it's about practicing until your weaknesses become strengths." Something changed in the atmosphere after that. Marcus still looked annoyed, but the others started asking Sarah for tips. She showed them what Dad had taught her about proper form, foot placement, and following through. For a moment, she felt like her old self again, before the fire, before the car, when she was just a girl who loved basketball and had a dad who loved teaching it. As the morning wore on, more kids showed up to play. Sarah was surprised to find herself included in the pickup games. She wasn't just included, they actually wanted her on their teams. Her perfect assists and steady shooting made her a valuable player, and for a few precious hours, nothing else mattered. During a water break, She overheard two kids talking about an upcoming event that made her heart stop. "Did you hear Michael Jordan's coming next week?" "No way." "Yeah, for that charity thing at the community center. My mom got tickets through work." Sarah's mind raced. Michael Jordan, her dad's hero, the greatest basketball player ever, would be right here in their neighborhood. She remembered all the times she and Dad had watched Jordan's games together, how Dad would break down Jordan's moves and teach them to her. But more than that, she thought about Mom, getting thinner every day, coughing more often, refusing to see a doctor, because they couldn't afford it. If she could just talk to Michael Jordan, explain their situation, maybe he could help. Dad always said Jordan was known for his generosity, for giving back to the community. Sarah played harder than ever for the rest of the morning, imagining she was practicing for her moment with Jordan. She had to be perfect, had to show him she was serious about basketball, had to make him listen. When she finally returned to the car that afternoon, her muscles aching but her heart full of purpose, Mom was already there, looking worried. "Sarah, honey, I need to talk to you," Mom said, and something in her voice made Sarah's stomach clench. "I had to leave work early today. The cough, it's getting worse." Sarah looked at her mother's pale face, the dark circles under her eyes, and made a decision. One way or another, she would find a way to talk to Michael Jordan. She had to, for Mom, for their future, for the memory of Dad that lived in every bounce of his old basketball. She held Mom's hand as they sat in their car home, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded Sarah of hope. Next week, everything would change. It had to. She just didn't know yet how right she was. The week crawled by slower than a turtle walking backward. Sarah spent every free moment at the community court, practicing until her arms felt like jelly and her legs could barely carry her back to the car. She had to be ready. Perfect. This was their one chance. Mom's cough had gotten so bad she couldn't work the breakfast shift anymore. "Just need some rest," she kept saying, but Sarah saw how she shivered even under 3 blankets. The tips from the dinner shift barely covered gas for the car's heater at night. Finally, the day of Michael Jordan's visit arrived. Sarah woke up before dawn, her stomach doing cartwheels. She carefully pulled Dad's basketball from its safe spot and cleaned it with the corner of her shirt, making his signature shine. "You're up early," Mom whispered, then started coughing. The sound was deeper than before, rattling in her chest. "Mom, maybe you should stay in the car today. Keep warm," Sarah suggested, trying to hide her worry. "I can go by myself." Mom shook her head. "Not a chance, sweetie. I wouldn't miss this for anything." She smiled, but Sarah noticed how she had to hold onto the seat to pull herself up. They arrived at the community center 3 hours early. Already, a crowd had gathered, people stamping their feet against the December cold. Sarah clutched the basketball tight as she and Mom found a spot near the entrance. "Look," someone whispered nearby. "They're setting up the security barriers." Sarah stood on tiptoes to see better. Men in dark uniforms were placing metal barriers in a long line leading to the community center doors. Her heart sank as she realized how many people stood between her and those doors. "Don't worry," Mom said, reading her expression. "We'll find a way." 2 hours passed. The crowd grew larger, pushing forward every time the doors opened, even though it was just security people going in and out. Mom's coughing got worse in the ED cold, despite wearing both their jackets. Sarah had insisted she could stay warm by jumping up and down. "Sarah? Sarah Thompson?" She turned to see Marcus from the basketball court, bundled up in a thick winter coat. "Here with your mom?" He glanced at Mom, taking in her pale face and double jackets. Something changed in his expression. "Why don't you guys come stand with us? My mom's got VIP passes through her work. We're allowed closer to the front." Sarah looked at him suspiciously, but his offer seemed genuine. Mom started coughing again, and Sarah made her decision. "Thanks, Marcus. That would be great." As they followed Marcus through the crowd, Sarah heard whispers of excitement. "His car just pulled up. He's here early. Michael Jordan is actually here." Sarah's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. This was it, their chance. She gripped the basketball tighter. The crowd surged forward suddenly, everyone trying to get closer to the black SUV that had just pulled up. Sarah felt Mom's hand slip from hers as people pushed between them. "Mom!" she called out, panic rising in her throat. "Mom!" "I'm okay," she heard Mom's voice, but couldn't see her through the forest of winter coats. "Stay where you are, honey. I'll find you." The crowd moved again, like a wave in the ocean, carrying Sarah closer to the barriers. Through gaps between people, she caught glimpses of tall men in suits walking alongside someone in a perfectly tailored coat that probably cost more than a year's rent in their old apartment. Michael Jordan. He was right there, less than 50 feet away, smiling and waving as he walked toward the community center. Sarah tried to call out, but her voice was lost in the roar of the crowd. She had to get closer. Remembering Dad's basketball moves, she ducked and weaved through the crowd, using her small size to her advantage. "Excuse me." She squeezed past a man in a puffy jacket. "Sorry." She slipped between two teenagers taking photos. 20 feet away now. She could see Jordan's face clearly. He was even taller than she'd imagined. "Mr. Jordan," she called out, her voice cracking. "Please, Mr. Jordan." He didn't hear her. The security guards were moving him toward the doors quickly. Sarah felt tears freeze on her cheeks. This couldn't be happening. They needed help. Mom needed help. Then she remembered what Dad always said. When you're down by 2 points with seconds left on the clock, that's when champions show what they're made of. Sarah took a deep breath and shouted with everything she had, "Your crossover against the Jazz in '97, right to left, behind the back, then through the legs before the game-winning shot." Jordan stopped mid-stride. The crowd noise dimmed as he turned, looking for the source of those words. Not many kids her age would know about that move, let alone be able to describe it. Sarah raised Dad's basketball above her head. "Please, Mr. Jordan. My dad taught me all your moves before he died. We need help." Their eyes met across the crowd. Sarah saw something flicker in his expression. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition of a true fan. He whispered something to one of the security guards. The guard walked toward her, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. "Come with me, miss," he said kindly. "Mr. Jordan would like to speak with you." Sarah's legs felt like jelly as she followed. The guard. She couldn't believe it was happening. But then she remembered. "Mom!" She spun around, searching the crowd desperately. "Sarah!" It was Marcus again, supporting Mom as they pushed through to the front. "We've got her. She's okay." "How'd they know?" Security guard nodded, understanding. "Your mother can come too." As they walked toward Michael Jordan, Sarah gripped Dad's basketball like a lifeline. The greatest basketball player in history was looking right at her, waiting to hear what she had to say. She thought of all the nights in the car, all Mom's coughing, all her practice on the empty court. No more fear, no more shame. She would tell him everything. But before she could speak, Jordan's eyes fixed on the basketball in her hands, specifically on the signature that Sarah had cleaned so carefully that morning. His expression changed completely, like someone who had just seen a ghost. Basketball, he said, his deep voice cutting through the winter air. Where did you get it? Sarah looked down at Dad's signature, then back at Jordan's face. Why did he look so shocked? She was about to find out that this wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about a promise made long ago, a debt unpaid, and a friendship that would change everything. The world seemed to shrink until it was just Sarah, Michael Jordan, and Dad's basketball between them. The crowd's noise faded to a distant hum as Jordan stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the signature on the ball. "Sir?" One of the security guards touched his earpiece. "We need to get inside. The event starts in 10 minutes. Jordan held up, one hand silencing the guard. "Give me a moment." He knelt down to Sarah's level, and she could see the questions in his eyes. "What's your name?" His voice was gentler now, almost careful. "Sarah Thompson," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Mom's cough broke through the silence, and Sarah saw Jordan's gaze shift to her mother, taking in her thin jacket and pale face. "Thompson," he repeated slowly, as if testing the name on his tongue. "And your father?" "James Thompson," Sarah said proudly. "He taught me everything I know about basketball. He said you were the greatest player ever, but that it wasn't just your talent. It was how hard you worked, how you never gave up." Jordan's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the basketball. "May I?" Sarah nodded, carefully handing over her most precious possession. She watched as Jordan turned the ball in his hands until he found the signature. His fingers traced the faded letters, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw tears in his eyes. "Jimmy," he whispered, so quietly Sarah almost missed it. Then louder, "Your father. He was a firefighter?" "Yes, sir. He died saving a family from a fire last year. Their house was burning and—" Sarah's voice caught in her throat. "And he went back in for the little girl," Jordan finished, his voice rough with emotion. "Even though they told him the structure was unstable, that's exactly the kind of thing Jimmy would do." Sarah stared at him. "How did you know that?" Before Jordan could answer, Mom started coughing again, harder this time. She swayed on her feet, and both Marcus and his mother moved to steady her. Jordan stood quickly, switching into action mode. "Get my car back here," he ordered one of the guards, "and call ahead to Memorial Hospital. Tell them we're coming." He turned to another guard. "The event? Already on it, sir," the guard said, pulling out a phone. "We'll announce a slight delay." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "Hospital? But we can't afford—" "Don't worry about that," Jordan said firmly. He handed the basketball on AT back to Sarah with careful reverence. "Your father—" He paused, seeming to make a decision. "Let's get your mom taken care of first. Then you and I need to have a long talk about Jimmy Thompson." Everything happened very fast after that. The black SUV appeared, and suddenly Sarah found herself sitting in the back seat next to Mom, who was wrapped in a warm blanket that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Marcus and his mom promised to tell the school where Sarah was. Jordan sat in the front seat, making phone calls in a low, urgent voice. As they drove through the city streets, Sarah clutched Dad's basketball and tried to make sense of what was happening. How did Michael Jordan know about the fire? Why did he say Jimmy, like they were old friends? And why did he keep glancing back at her in the rearview mirror with that strange mix of sadness and wonder in his eyes? At the hospital, they didn't have to wait. A team of doctors was ready, whisking Mom away for tests, while a kind nurse brought Sarah hot chocolate and a sandwich. Jordan stayed with her in the waiting room, waving away his assistant's urgent whispers about the delayed event. "The basketball," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Has it always had that small dent on the left side? Right next to the signature?" Sarah nodded, surprised. Dad said it happened during a game in high school. His team was down by 1 point in the championship, and he dove into the bleachers to save the ball, passed it back to his teammate for the winning shot. Jordan finished. I know. I was the teammate. Sarah's hot chocolate nearly slipped from her hands. What? Jordan smiled, but his eyes were distant, lost in memory. Your dad and I played high school basketball together. He was the best point guard I'd ever seen. Could have played college ball, maybe even pros. But Jimmy, he shook his head. He always said there were more important things than basketball. He wanted to help people, save lives. Sarah's mind was spinning. Dad had played basketball with Michael Jordan? Why had he never told her? She had so many questions, but before, she could ask any of them. The doctor appeared in the waiting room doorway. Mr. Jordan, Mrs. Thompson is asking for her daughter. Sarah jumped up, but Jordan gently caught her arm. Sarah, wait. He looked straight into her eyes, and she saw something there. Recognition, determination, and maybe a hint of guilt. There's something I need to tell you about your father and me, about a promise I made a long time ago. But first, let's go see your mom. As they walked down the hospital corridor, Sarah felt like she was in a dream. But the basketball in her hands was real. The signature was real, and Michael Jordan's words echoed in her head. A promise I made a long time ago. Whatever that promise was, Sarah had a feeling it was about to change everything. She just didn't know if she was ready for what she was about to learn about her father, and the legendary basketball player walking beside her who seemed to know so much more than he was telling. Mom was sitting up in the hospital bed, already looking better with an IV in her arm and color returning to her cheeks. She reached out for Sarah as they entered the room. The doctors say it's pneumonia, she said, before Sarah could ask. They caught it early enough. She looked at Michael Jordan with grateful eyes. Thank you. I don't know how we can ever... Please, Jordan held up his hand. Don't worry about anything right now. Just focus on getting better. He turned to Sarah with an oddly determined expression. While your mom rests, would you mind showing me some of those basketball moves you mentioned? The hospital had a small rehabilitation gym on the first floor, complete with a basketball hoop. Sarah stood at the free throw line, acutely aware that the greatest basketball player in history was watching her every move. Your dad taught you? Jordan asked as she bounced the ball. Sarah nodded. Every day after school, before. She swallowed hard. Before the fire. Show me his favorite drill. Sarah took a deep breath and began the complex series of dribbles Dad had drilled with her hundreds of times. Crossover, between the legs, behind the back, spin move, then shoot. The ball swished through the net. Jordan's expression changed. That's Jimmy's drill. He created that in high school. Said it taught all the fundamentals in one sequence. He walked onto the court. But you added something at the end there. That little hesitation before the shot? Dad said I should make the moves my own, Sarah explained. Add my own style. Mind if I try something? Jordan asked, holding out his hand for the ball. When Sarah passed it to him, he moved to the three-point line. Copy me exactly. He began a sequence that seemed strangely familiar to Sarah, though she'd never seen it before. It was like her dad's drill, but with subtle differences. Without thinking, she found herself mirroring Jordan's movements perfectly. Jordan stopped mid-dribble, staring at her. How did you? That was a variation your dad and I created together. We never showed anyone else. It was our secret weapon in high school. I don't know, Sarah said, confused. It just felt natural, like I'd seen it before. Jordan's eyes grew distant. You probably did. Jimmy must have practiced it at home, even after. He cleared his throat. Your form is exactly like his. Same follow-through, same footwork. Even that little head fake he used to do. He walked to a bench and sat down heavily, gesturing for Sarah to join him. Your dad and I weren't just teammates. We were best friends, inseparable. Everyone thought I was the star, but Jimmy made me better. He pushed me harder than any coach ever did. Sarah sat very still, afraid to break the spell as Jordan continued. We had big dreams, Jimmy and me. Going to play college ball together, maybe even pros. But then his mom got sick, your grandmother, cancer. Medical bills were piling up, and Jordan's voice cracked slightly. He gave up his basketball scholarship to join the fire department instead. Said they offered good benefits, and his mom needed treatment right away. Did she get better? Sarah asked softly. Jordan nodded. Thanks to Jimmy. He saved her life by giving up his dreams. That's who your dad was, always putting others first. He stood suddenly. One more drill, something special. He positioned Sarah at center court. Your dad created this move our senior year. No one could stop it. Let's see if it's in your blood. For the next hour, Jordan worked with Sarah, showing her moves that weren't in any basketball playbook. These were special plays, created by two best friends on a high school court long ago. To Jordan's amazement, Sarah picked them up instantly, as if the knowledge had been sleeping in her muscles, waiting to be awakened. It's like watching Jimmy all over again, he murmured, more to himself than to Sarah. That same grace, that instinct for the game. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Jordan, Mrs. Thompson is asking for you both. As they walked back to Mom's room, Jordan put a hand on Sarah's shoulder. There's something I need to tell you both. About a promise I made to Jimmy the last time I saw him. I've been looking for a way to fulfill that promise for months now. Never knowing. He smiled down at her. Never knowing his daughter was out. There, carrying his legacy in every bounce of that basketball. Sarah looked up at the legendary player, seeing him now not as Michael Jordan, the basketball star, but as her dad's best friend. She had a feeling the biggest revelation was still to come. They reached Mom's door, and Jordan took a deep breath. Ready to hear about your dad's last request? Sarah nodded, clutching the basketball with her father's signature. She was ready to learn the truth about her dad's connection to Michael Jordan and the promise that was about to change their lives forever. Mom was sitting up straighter in her hospital bed when they entered, the IV medicine already helping her look stronger. Her eyes moved between Jordan and Sarah, noting their matching expressions of intensity. Mrs. Thompson, Jordan began, pulling up a chair. Sarah. He took a deep breath. What I'm about to tell you. I've been searching for you both for months. After the fire, when I heard about Jimmy. He paused, collecting himself. I need to tell you about the last time I saw your husband. Your father. Sarah sat on the edge of her mom's bed, still holding Dad's basketball. Mom reached out and took her hand. It was 3 days before the fire, Jordan continued. Jimmy called me out of the blue. We tried to keep in touch over the years, but life gets busy, you know? But that day, he was insistent about meeting, said it couldn't wait. Jordan's eyes grew distant with memory. We met at our old high school gym. Jimmy brought that basketball. He nodded at the ball in Sarah's hands. We played one-on-one, just like old times. But I could tell something was bothering him. What was it? Sarah whispered. He was worried about you both. The economy was bad, prices were rising, and he was afraid his firefighter's salary wouldn't be enough to keep you secure, if anything ever happened to him. Jordan's voice grew thick. It was like he knew somehow. Mom's hand tightened around Sarah's. We sat on the bleachers, and Jimmy made me promise something. Jordan leaned forward, his eyes intense. He said, "Michael, if anything ever happens to me, find my girls. Make sure they're okay." I promised him right there, but I didn't think. He shook his head. I never thought I'd have to fulfill that promise so soon. But the fire happened 3 days later, Sarah said softly. And we lost the house. And then Mom lost her job because she got sick, and I didn't know where you were. Jordan cut in, his voice full of regret. I tried to find you, hired private investigators, checked every Thompson family in the city, but you'd already moved. And then we started living in the car, Mom finished quietly. I was too ashamed to reach out to anyone. Jordan stood up suddenly, pacing the hospital room. Jimmy was more than my teammate, more than my best friend. He was my brother in everything but blood. When I made it to the NBA, he was the first person I called. When I won my first championship, he was there in the stands, cheering louder than anyone. He turned to face them. And when I needed someone to remind me what really mattered in life, it was Jimmy who'd set me straight. He gave up his own basketball dreams to take care of his mother, became a firefighter to help others. And in the end, Jordan's voice broke. In the end, he gave his life saving that little girl. Sarah remembered that day with painful clarity. The news reports, the sirens, the police officer at their door. But she'd never known about this promise, this connection to Michael Jordan. "There's more," Jordan said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. That day in the gym, Jimmy gave me this. Said if anything happened to him, I should open it. Inside was a letter, and this. He handed Sarah a faded photograph. She gasped. It showed 2 teenage boys in basketball uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. One was obviously a young Michael Jordan. The other? Dad, Sarah breathed. They had the same smile, the same way of standing with one hip cocked to the side. "Read what's written on the back," Jordan said softly. Sarah turned the photo over. In her father's familiar handwriting were the words, "Brothers on and off the court. MJ and JT, champions forever." The letter, Jordan continued, unfolding a worn piece of paper, was about you, Sarah. About how you had his love for basketball, his natural talent, how you were mastering moves at 11 that took us years to perfect. He wrote that if anything happened to him, he wanted me to make sure you had the chance to follow your dreams. The dreams he gave up. Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks. Mom was crying too. "I've been looking for you for months," Jordan repeated, "planning to fulfill my promise to Jimmy. And now, watching you play." He smiled through his own tears. "It's like seeing him again. That same spirit, that same pure love of the game." He knelt in front of Sarah. "Your dad saved my life once. Did you know that? Not in a fire, but when I was ready to quit basketball in high school. He wouldn't let me give up. Stayed late every day to practice with me. Pushed me to be better." Standing up, Jordan looked at both Sarah and her mom. "So, here's what's going to happen. First, you're both coming to stay at my guest house while we find you a proper home. No arguments," he added, as Mom started to protest. "Jimmy would never forgive me if I did any less." Second, he turned to Sarah. "If you want it, there's a spot waiting for you at the best basketball academy in the city. Full scholarship. And before you worry about equipment or uniforms," he smiled, "consider it covered. All of it. And third," he faced Mom, I've already spoken to the hospital administrator. Your treatment is taken care of. And when you're better, I have some friends who'd love to offer you a job at the Chicago Bulls administrative office. If you're interested." Mom was crying too hard to speak, but she nodded. "Jimmy saved a little girl from that fire," Jordan said quietly. "Gave his life doing what he always did, putting others first. Now it's my turn to keep my promise to him, to take care of his family." He picked up Dad's basketball from where Sarah had set it down. "This ball has seen a lot of history. Jimmy's signature, our secret moves, all those practice sessions with you. Maybe it's time to add some new memories." Sarah stood up, wiping her eyes. "Dad would like that." Jordan smiled, the same bright smile from the teenage photo. "Yes, he would." "And Sarah?" He handed her the ball. "He'd be so proud of you. Not just for your basketball skills, but for taking care of your mom, for never giving up, for keeping his memory alive in every game you play." Looking down at the ball in her hands, Sarah saw her father's signature in a new light. It wasn't just a reminder of what she'd lost. It was a bridge to something new. A future she'd thought was impossible just hours ago. And somewhere, she was sure Dad was watching, smiling that same crooked smile from the photo, as his best friend kept the promise that would change everything. 3 months later, Sarah stood at the free throw line of the Chicago Bulls practice facility. Dad's basketball in her hands. The empty arena seemed to hold its breath as she prepared to shoot. "Eyes on the target, champ," she whispered, hearing the words in both her father's voice and Michael Jordan's now. The ball arced through the air and swished through the net. Nothing but net, just like Dad had taught her. "Perfect form," Jordan called from the sidelines. He was dressed casually in Bulls warm-up gear, looking more like her basketball mentor now than the legend she'd first met that cold day outside the community center. Jimmy would have loved to see that. So much had changed since that day. Mom was healthy now, her pneumonia completely gone. She loved her new job in the Bulls front office, where she got to use her organizational skills to help run community outreach programs. They lived in a cozy apartment near Sarah's new school, where pictures of Dad hung proudly on the walls, including that treasured photo of him and Jordan as teenagers. But the biggest change was in Sarah herself. Gone was the girl who hid her, homelessness in shame. In her place stood a confident young athlete, wearing her father's number on her academy team jersey. "Ready for tomorrow?" Jordan asked, retrieving the ball and walking over to her. "First game of the season is a big deal." Sarah nodded, though butterflies danced in her stomach. The Chicago Youth Basketball Academy was the best in the state, and tomorrow would be her first official game as their starting point guard. "I wish Dad could be there," she said softly. Jordan put a hand on her shoulder. "He'll be there, Sarah. In every move you make, every shot you take. Just like he's been here all along." He was right. These past months, as Jordan had taught her more about basketball and shared stories about her dad, Sarah had felt closer to her father than ever. Each new detail was like a precious gift. How Dad had been the one to teach Jordan his famous fadeaway shot. How they'd spent entire summers perfecting their game. How Dad would always stay late to help younger players. "You know what Jimmy used to say before every big game?" Jordan asked, spinning the basketball on his finger. A trick he'd recently taught Sarah. "What?" he'd say. "It's not about being perfect. It's about playing with heart." Jordan smiled at the memory. Then he'd go out and play the most perfect game you'd ever seen anyway. Sarah laughed. That sounded exactly like her dad. The sound of heels clicking on the court made them both turn. Mom was walking toward them, looking professional in her Bulls. Staff blazer, carrying a small box. Found it in storage, she said, handing the box to Sarah. I think it's time. Inside was Dad's old high school jersey, carefully preserved. The name Thompson arched across the back, with his number 23 below it, the same number Jordan had made famous, but which Dad had worn first on their high school team. He'd want you to have it, Mom said, her eyes shining. Maybe you could wear it during warm-ups tomorrow? Sarah hugged the jersey close, breathing in the faint scent of their old house that still clung to it. Really? Jordan nodded. I think it's perfect, and I have something to add to it. He pulled out a marker and carefully wrote on the sleeve, Playing with heart. JT's legacy lives on. That night, back in their apartment, Sarah sat on her bed, looking at her collection of treasures. Dad's basketball, the teenage photo of him with Jordan, and now his jersey. On her wall hung her academy team photo, where she stood proudly in the front row, wearing number 23. Next to it was a news article about the James Thompson Memorial Basketball Program, which Jordan had established to help kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. Knock, knock, Mom said from the doorway. Someone's here to see you. Sarah looked up to see Marcus from her old neighborhood standing there awkwardly. He'd been coming to her games, cheering louder than anyone. Just wanted to wish. You luck tomorrow, he said, then hesitated. Your dad, he used to help us kids at the community court sometimes. Taught me how to shoot properly. I never knew he was friends with Michael Jordan. Sarah smiled. He never told anyone. Dad wasn't about being famous. He just loved the game and helping others love it too. After Marcus left, Mom sat on Sarah's bed. You know, your father would be so proud of how you've handled everything. Not just the basketball, but how you've stayed humble. How you helped the younger kids at the academy. Just like Dad did, Sarah finished. Mom hugged her tight. Exactly like Dad did. The next morning, as Sarah walked onto the court for her first game, wearing Dad's jersey over her uniform, she felt nothing but peace. The stands were packed. She could see Mom in her Bulls blazer, Marcus and his family holding a Go Sarah sign, and Jordan sitting quietly in the back, watching over his best friend's daughter. She bounced Dad's basketball once, feeling all the history in its worn surface. The games with Dad, the practices with Jordan, the hope it had given her during those hard months in the car. Then she handed it to Mom for safekeeping and jogged to join her team. As the referee raised the whistle to his lips, Sarah felt that familiar calm that came with knowing exactly who she was. James Thompson's daughter, carrying forward his legacy of playing with heart, helping others, and finding family in unexpected places. And somewhere above, she knew Dad was watching, that crooked smile on his face as his little girl played the game they both loved. Not just playing it, but playing it with heart. Just like he'd taught her. Some promises, Sarah had learned, changed more than just one life. They created ripples that touched everyone around them, turning strangers into family, and turning endings into new beginnings. The whistle blew. The game began. And Sarah Thompson, daughter of a hero, student of a legend, played with all her heart, adding her own chapter to a story that had started long ago on a high school court, with two best friends who dreamed of changing the world, one basketball game at a time. Thank you for joining Sarah on her incredible journey from hardship to hope. Sometimes the greatest changes in our lives come from unexpected connections and promises kept. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it with someone who might need a reminder that better days are always possible. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear which part of Sarah and Michael Jordan's story resonated with you the most. Remember, just like Sarah's dad always said, it's not about being perfect. It's about playing with heart. See you in the next story.